MEPs gloated over Theresa May's humiliating defeat on the Brexit Bill today as the PM heads to Brussels today for a crucial summit. 11 Conservative MPs last night voted to give the Commons a meaningful vote over any Brexit agreement with the EU, despite government pleas to let ministers retain control. The Rebel MPs were jubilant with former Education Secretary Nicky Morgan boasting that Mrs May would now have to bow to their will. The EU Parliament's chief Brexit coordinator Guy Verhofstadt deployed the Vote Leave referendum slogan to mock the Premier, saying the Commons had taken back control. The government was defeated by a margin of 4 votes, losing 309 to 305, and Labour MPs joined the rebels in cheering and applauding as the extraordinary result was announced last night. But pro-Brexit Conservative MPs condemned their colleagues' actions, arguing that it undermines the Prime Minister's negotiating position. Nadine, Conservative MP for Mid-Bedfordshire, hit back and said the Tory rebels have put a spring in Labour's step, giving them a taste of winning. Mr Grieve's amendment demands ministers pass a full law enshrining the exit deal before the government is allowed to start implementing it. A furious Mrs May quickly sacked former Minister Stephen Hammond from his role as Tory Vice Chairman after he joined the revolt. But Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt played down the impact today, insisting the Brexit process would not be derailed. I don't think it should be a surprise that in a hung Parliament wants to reassert its right to scrutinise the process, he told BBC Radio 4's Today programme. But we should also be clear, this isn't going to slow down Brexit, it's not going to stop Brexit. Asked whether MPs now had the power to force the government back to the negotiating table, Mr Hunt said, Parliament can say whatever it wants, but of course renegotiation is something that involves two parties. Minister Raab also hinted they could try to overturn the result at a later stage in the legislation. p.m, he returned to the dispatch box to promise MPs he would turn his assurance into an amendment if MPs backed down. His concession appeared to peel off at least two Tory rebels as Vicky Ford and Paul Masterton backed down. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn branded it a humiliating loss of authority for the government on the eve of the European Council meeting. The debate saw furious blue-on-blue exchanges as Brexiteers Bernard Joking and Bill Cash rose to defend the government. Mr Grieve warned the government he had tried to be helpful, but that on the issue of a meaningful vote we had run out of road, and all rational discourse starts to evaporate. He said this has led to confrontation in which it is suggested the underlying purpose is sabotage, followed by a hurling of public abuse including by other Tories. Signalling support for the amendment, Mr Clark said the key thing around a meaningful vote was its timing, adding, "The vote's got to take place before the British government has committed itself to the terms of the treaty-like agreement that is entered into with the other members." Any other vote is not meaningful. Mr Clark said it was quite obvious that the government was not going to be remotely near a detailed agreement by March 2019. But they don't know what leave means, because nobody discussed what leave meant when we were having the referendum. Another rebel, Antoinette Sandbar, expressed fears that a vote on a Brexit deal motion outlined by the government could be meaningless. Offering a political assurance, rather than a change to the bill, Mr Raab said, "None of the statutory instruments will come into effect until Parliament has voted on the final deal." He urged the rebels to drop their amendment, adding, "If we waited for the withdrawal agreement bill, not just to be introduced after the withdrawal agreement has been signed, but fully enacted, waiting for the full passage of that to happen, we would not have the time to deal with the volume of technical legislation that we need to put through under secondary legislation." At Prime Minister's questions, Mrs May said, We will put the final withdrawal agreement between the UK and the EU to a vote in both houses of Parliament before it comes into force. She said Westminster would be given a vote ahead of the European Parliament and well before the date of Brexit in March 2019. To be clear, the final deal will be agreed before we leave, and honourable and right honourable members will get a vote on it, Mrs May told the Commons. Former Constitution Minister John Pennis offered support to Mrs May ahead of the vote. He said, "The government has already promised not only a full-scale vote on the EU deal as soon as it's been struck, but up to 2 more ratification votes plus an entire act of Parliament before it becomes law." That's as much, or more, than even the most fervent Democrat could reasonably ask. The Prime Minister negotiated a far better Stage 1 deal last week than the doommongers were predicting. Let's not repay her by sending her off to Brussels with an unnecessary and unfair amendment that will only make her job harder. In an attempt to head off defeat, Brexit Secretary David Davis has written to MPs insisting there will be a vote in the Commons on the term of the exit arrangements, but that the amendment goes too far. The Brexit department today repeated a promise there would be a Commons vote on the exit deal before it is implemented. The government has also promised to enshrine a withdrawal treaty law, but said this might not happen before exit day. But Mr Grieve told Sky News, "I have no desire to defeat my government at all. I am not a rebel. I think I have only rebelled once over a local issue in the 21 years I have been in Parliament." I don't want to do that, but the government needs to listen to what has been said to them, and at the moment unfortunately my impression of the last few days, when I have been talking to the government, is it seems to be a bit of a dialogue of the deaf. They have sort of turned this into a battle of wills, and this is a completely pointless exercise. They need to listen to the point that is being made, and they need to respond to it. He said the vote on whether to follow the instruction of the referendum and leave the EU has already happened when MPs backed invoking Article 50. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier wants the withdrawal deal finalised by October 2018, and the government has committed to hold a vote in Parliament as soon as possible after the negotiations have concluded. The Brexit secretary said, "If Parliament supports the resolution to proceed with the withdrawal agreement and the terms for our future relationship, the government will bring forward a withdrawal agreement and implementation bill to give the withdrawal agreement domestic legal effect." The bill will implement the terms of the withdrawal agreement in UK law, as well as providing a further opportunity for parliamentary scrutiny. This legislation will be introduced before the UK exits the EU, and the substantive provisions will only take effect from the moment of exit. The government swerved possible defeat last night with concessions on so-called Henry VIII powers in the legislation. And another very tight vote is expected next Wednesday as ministers stand behind controversial plans to write the exit date into the withdrawal legislation. Yesterday, Conservative former leader Ian Duncan Smith accused Mr Grieve and his supporters of grandstanding and trying to tie the government's hands in the Brexit talks. "I think this is looking for ways to derail the bill," he told The World at one. "There comes a moment when really grandstanding has to stop." Tying the government's hands in the way that he would wish to tie them so early on is quite wrong.